The Judith Basin in April of '76 was a grand, indifferent lie. It would spread itself out before you, miles of greening prairie rolling to the distant snow-capped peaks of the Little Belts, and promise nothing but honest work under an honest sky. We believed it, most of us. 5 men, bound by the herd in the vastness, trying to carve out a living from a land that didn't care for our carvings. I was Jacob Hollister, foreman of this outfit. Late 40s, sun-creased face, eyes that had seen enough to know a lie when it walked on 2 legs, but not enough to spot one that flew. My hands were thick, the knuckles scarred from a lifetime of rope and saddle leather. I didn't talk much, didn't see the need. Action spoke louder than words, especially out here. My voice, when it came, was a low rumble, worn down by the wind and the distance. We had a good herd, near 1,000 head, grazing fat on the spring grass. The air was dry, carrying the scent of sage and the faint, sweet tang of pine. From the distant ridges, the lowing of the cattle, the creak of saddle leather, the occasional cry of a hawk, those were the sounds of our routine. We'd been out here for weeks, moving slow, letting the cattle fatten up before the drive. It was a good life, a hard life, but a predictable one, until it wasn't. There was Thomas Reed, barely 20, all eager eyes and unruly brown hair, freckles scattered across his nose like dust. He was quick to laugh, a little too earnest, always talking about the homestead he'd build one day. A small cabin, fertile land. He saw wonder in the vast sky, not just the promise of rain. He was humming a tune, something light and forgettable, as he checked the hobbles on a stray calf. He was the future, or what we hoped was the future. Samuel Cord, in his early 30s, was our steady hand. A solid build, a thick, dark beard that hid a stubborn jaw. His eyes missed little, always scanning the horizon, assessing the herd. He didn't waste words, but when he spoke, it was usually with a dry wit or a practical observation that cut straight to the bone. Cord was checking his Winchester, running a cloth over the barrel, his movements precise and unhurried. You wanted Cord beside you when things went south. Then there were the Carver brothers, Dutch and William, inseparable, like 2 burrs on a blanket. Dutch, the older, was a man of booming laughter and boundless, if sometimes reckless, energy. His face was broad, honest, always flushed from the sun. He was sharpening his Bowie knife, the steel ringing soft against the whetstone, a sound of industry and readiness. He was quick to anger, quicker to defend. His loyalty to William was a physical thing, something you could almost see in the way he watched over his quieter brother. William was a year or 2 younger than Dutch, more reserved, often overshadowed. He had a nervous habit of chewing on his lip, and his eyes, though kind, often held a flicker of anxiety. He watched Dutch, always, following his lead. William was observant, perhaps too much so. He noticed the subtle shifts in the land, the way a shadow fell, the change in the wind's whisper. He was the first to feel it, I think, that creeping wrongness. We were gathered around the campfire, the last light fading over the jagged silhouettes of the Little Belt Mountains. The air was turning colder, as it always did when the sun dipped below the horizon. But this felt different. It was a coldness that seeped into the bones, not just from the air, but from something deeper. Dutch finished his blade, tested the edge with his thumb. "Sharp enough to shave a fly's whiskers," he declared, his voice echoing a little too loud in the sudden quiet. "Best be sharp, Dutch," Cord grunted, not looking up from his rifle. "Heard tell of a cougar working this ridge, big as a grizzly." I felt it then. That silence between the crickets that stretched too long, the normal sounds of the prairie, the rustle of small animals, the distant hoot of an owl, the constant hum of insects. They weren't quite right. They were muffled or absent altogether. The land was holding its breath, and our bodies, despite our minds, knew it. William, who had been tending the fire, poked at the embers. "That ain't no cougar, Samuel," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Saw a deer carcass up by the northern springs this morning. Not a cougar kill, not a wolf either." I'd seen it too on my morning rounds, a young doe torn apart, but not like any predator I'd ever known. The flesh was stripped clean in places but not chewed, and the bones were scattered with an odd precision, almost artistic in their brutality. I'd blamed a particularly savage bear maybe, or a lone starved wolf. Had to blame something known. "Probably some hungry wolf, son," I said, my voice low, trying to dismiss the unease that William's words had stirred. "They get desperate this time of year." William just nodded, but his eyes, when he looked up at the vast, star-dusted sky, held a flicker of something I recognized. Anxiety. Or maybe something closer to fear. The cattle themselves were restless, not stampede restless, but a subtle unease. They huddled closer, their lowing softer, more mournful. Their eyes, dark and placid by day, seemed to hold a nervous glint in the firelight. They stared towards the tree line, towards the distant ridges, their heads lifted, sniffing the wind for a scent that wasn't there, or one that was too alien to comprehend. "They're jumpy tonight," Thomas observed, coming back to the fire, rubbing his hands together against the chill. "Must be the change in the wind." He sat down, pulling a piece of jerky from his pocket. "Got me thinking, Jacob. When I get my own spread, I'm going to build the house right up on a rise. Good view of the whole valley. Fences strong enough to hold a grizzly, a creek for water, and a porch. Big. Enough for a dozen kids." He looked up at the stars, a wistful smile on his face. "A man needs a place of his own, you know? Something to leave behind." Dutch clapped him on the shoulder, a booming laugh. "You'll get it, boy. Just got to keep earning. And stay clear of whiskey and painted women." Thomas laughed, a bright, clear sound that felt out of place in the growing quiet. "Don't worry, Dutch. I got my eyes on the prize." But the silence kept creeping in, thick and heavy. The usual sounds of the wild were receding one by one. The wind, which had been a constant whispering rustle through the prairie grass, seemed to die down to nothing. The air grew still, unnaturally so, as if the very breath of the basin was being held. I stood up, walked a slow circle around the perimeter of the camp, checking the herd. My old Colt felt heavy on my hip. Every shadow seemed to stretch too long, too dark. The vastness of the land, which usually felt like freedom, now felt like a terrifying vulnerability. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to run that wasn't already the creature's domain. Back at the fire, the men were quiet now too, the last of Thomas's dreams fading into the night. Cord stared into the embers, his face unreadable. Dutch sat hunched, cleaning his fingernails with his bowie. William just watched the tree line, his lips moving silently, a prayer perhaps. I poured myself a cup of bitter coffee, the smell sharp in the still air. My gaze went to the horizon, to where the last faint glow of twilight had finally given way to the deep, impenetrable black of the Montana night. The stars were impossibly bright, a million cold pinpricks in a canvas that felt too big, too empty, too watchful. Then it came. Not a growl, not a shriek, not a roar. It was a sound that tore through the heavy silence, a sound that defied the very fabric of the night. It was like massive leather sails snapping in a gale, tearing through the air, but amplified 100-fold. A sound of immense weight, moving with impossible speed. A sound that was wrong, utterly, terrifyingly wrong. The cattle went quiet. A massive, unnatural hush before the panic. Then the panic. It wasn't a roar, not like a grizzly. It was a guttural, terrified bellow that ripped through the herd, 1,000 pounds of muscle and bone suddenly moving as one, a wave of dark bodies surging away from whatever had dropped from the sky. The ground shook. Dust exploded from beneath hooves, already thick on the air, blurring the edges of the night. My rifle was up, instinctive, before my mind could even process what my eyes were seeing. A shadow against the darkening sky, immense, diving. My mind tried to fit it to a bat, a bird, anything known. The size refused. The shape refused. It was too fast, too heavy. It dropped into the herd like a stone in a pond, and the world broke. Thomas Reed screamed. It had him. One moment he was by the fire, a boy with dreams of a homestead, a piece of jerky half-chewed in his mouth. The next, he was gone, lifted. Not like a man, but like a rag doll, snatched by talons that looked like twisted iron hooks. 15 feet into the air he went. His scream was sharp, agonizing, cutting through the chaos of the stampeding cattle, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. My rifle came up. I aimed. It was already too late. The creature didn't even pause. It was a blur of dark, leathery membrane and raw, powerful muscle, 8 feet tall, I'd guess, maybe more, standing on legs that ended in those terrible talons. Its wings, when they flared, were easily 20 feet across, blotting out the stars, catching the last faint glow from the dying campfire. Its head was twisted, bestial, yet disturbingly human in its malice, but I only got a fleeting glimpse. It was moving too fast. It flew towards the rocky outcrop where we'd grazed the herd earlier in the day, a jagged ridge of sandstone that jutted from the prairie like a broken tooth. Thomas was still screaming, a sound that seemed to stretch impossibly long even as he was carried higher. Then it stopped. For just a fraction of a second it hung there, Thomas still clutched in its grip. And then, with a casual, brutal flick of its wrist, it slammed him. Not dropped him. Slammed him against the hard, unforgiving face of the rock. The scream snapped, cut off, abrupt. A sickening crunch echoed even over the thunder of the cattle. Thomas's body went limp, a broken doll, then slid down the rock face, leaving a dark smear against the pale stone. He landed in a heap at the base, twisted, utterly still. It was over. Just like that. I fired. The shot cracked through the night, a puny sound against the immensity of what had just happened. The creature didn't flinch. It turned its head slowly, its dark shape momentarily outlined against the rising moon. I couldn't see its eyes. Not yet, but I felt them. A cold, ancient gaze that dismissed me. Then it dropped. Not back into the sky, but directly into the midst of the stampeding herd, right where the cattle were thickest. It was a strategic choice, a cruel one. The cattle, already in a frenzy, broke even harder. They became a living shield, an impossible wall of muscle and bone, making it impossible to get a clear shot. "Hold your fire," I bellowed, my voice raw. "Don't hit the herd." Cord was already firing, his Winchester booming. Dutch and William, their faces stark white in the flickering firelight, raised their rifles too, squeezing off shots into the churning darkness. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Bullets whizzed, but they seemed to do nothing. The creature was a phantom weaving through the chaos, moving with impossible speed, its movements precise and deadly. A piercing shriek tore through the din. It was loud, ear-splitting, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and something else. Something almost human in its pitch. It wasn't an animal. Sound. It was the sound of something deeply, terribly intelligent. It burst from the herd, not flying, but running. Its massive wings were folded back, surprisingly compact, moving with an unsettling dexterity. Its taloned feet struck the earth with the impact of a charging bull. It was coming for us. "Fall back," I yelled, reloading my Colt with shaking hands. "To the wagons!" There was no time. It covered the distance in a few monstrous strides. Cord, steady Samuel Cord, stood his ground, emptying his rifle. He was a man who didn't flinch, didn't break. He aimed for the center mass, as he always did. The bullet struck. I saw the creature flinch, A momentary pause, a ripple in its dark hide. It was hurt, but not stopped, not even slowed. It roared, a wet, guttural sound that vibrated in my chest. And then it struck, not with its talons, not with its teeth, but with a folded wing. A massive, bone-jarring blow like being hit by a freight train. Samuel Cord went down. He crumpled. A solid oak tree suddenly felled. He didn't scream, didn't make a sound. Just a grunt of pure agony as he hit the dirt. I saw the deep, ragged tears on his chest where the creature's wing had raked across him. Blood welled up, dark and thick, staining his shirt. He lay there, gasping, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gulps. Dutch and William were on him in an instant. They were brothers, and that bond was a force of nature. Dutch, the burly one, grabbed Cord under the arms. William grabbed his legs. "Get him up!" Dutch roared, his voice strained, desperate. "Get him to the wagons!" They tried to drag him, but Cord was a heavy man and he was dead weight. The creature watched them. It didn't immediately attack, not directly. It stalked them. A hunter savoring its prey. It moved with an unnerving grace, its head cocked, those terrible, malformed features observing their struggle. Its patience was terrifying. It wasn't just a beast. It was something more. I fired again, aiming for its head, a desperate hope that a lucky shot might find purchase. The bullet seemed to glance off its skull, a sharp ping-ear that made it flinch again, turning its attention to me. For a moment, its head snapped in my direction, and I saw a flash of something in the darkness, yellow, a slitted shape, eyes, intelligent eyes. It let out another shriek, a sound of pure, concentrated hatred, and lunged, not at me, but at the struggling brothers. Dutch and William, still trying to drag Cord, saw it coming. Dutch pulled his bowie, a glint of steel in the firelight, a pathetic, brave gesture against this impossible horror. William tried to pull Cord faster, his face a mask of terror. The creature was on them. It didn't strike, not with its wing this time. It moved with a terrible speed, circling, cutting off their escape. The ground was slick with mud and fresh blood from the cattle. William stumbled, his foot catching on something unseen. Cord, a dead weight, slid from their grasp. Dutch, ever the protector, pushed William clear. "Go! Get to the wagons, William!" But William wouldn't go. He fumbled with his rifle, trying to reload, his hands shaking so violently he dropped a bullet. The creature didn't wait. It seized Dutch, not with talons, not with a wing. It tackled him, driving him to the ground with a force that knocked the wind out of him. Dutch let out a choked gasp, his bowie clattering away into the darkness. He struggled, a powerful man, but he was nothing against the creature's immense strength. It pinned him, one massive three-toed foot pressing down on his chest, holding him immobile. William screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. He scrabbled for his rifle, his eyes fixed on his brother. The creature leaned down. It was close, too close. Its twisted, bestial face was inches from Dutch's. I saw it then, the full horror of its features, a mouth that was too wide, filled with teeth that were too sharp, too numerous, and those eyes, yellow, slitted like a cat's, but with a chilling, malevolent intelligence that made my blood run cold. It spoke. The sound was garbled, wet, like stones grinding together in thick mud. It wasn't a language I knew, but it was words. It was speech. And then clearer, sharper, guttural, a voice that scraped against the very edges of my sanity. It formed two words, "Mine now." William was still screaming. He got his rifle up, fired wildly, the bullet tearing into the dirt inches from the creature's head. It didn't even seem to notice. It was focused on Dutch. Dutch's eyes were wide, staring up at that impossible face, understanding the words, understanding his fate. His mouth opened, but no sound came out, only a gurgling, wet gasp. And then with a swift, brutal movement, The creature tore. It wasn't a bite. It was a rip. A savage, deliberate tearing motion. Its head moved, a blur of dark, glistening flesh, and then it pulled back. Dutch Carver's throat was open. A black, gaping wound. Blood pulsed. A thick, dark geyser against the fading firelight spraying over the creature's chest, over its face. He didn't make another sound. He just lay there, eyes still wide, staring at nothing, a gurgle of blood in his throat. William's screams died in his own throat, replaced by a choked, guttural sob. He just knelt there, his rifle forgotten, staring at his brother, at the impossible horror that had just unfolded. Two dead, one dying slow. William staring at ghosts. The creature stood over Dutch's body, its chest heaving. It was breathing, a deep, rasping sound. It looked at William, then at Cord, then at me. Its eyes, those terrible yellow slits, seemed to burn with a cold, ancient triumph. It had claimed its prize, and it had made sure we all knew it. The silence returned, heavy now, thicker with blood and the smell of something impossible. It was a silence that knew our names and knew we were next. William, though, William wouldn't have it. His brother was gone. The creature, still focused on us, on its terrible victory, didn't see it coming, not at first. William, on his knees, his rifle forgotten moments before, had found it. He had scooped it up, his hands still shaking, but now with a different kind of tremor. Not fear, not just fear, rage. A primal, blinding rage that burned away the terror for a single desperate moment. He didn't aim. He couldn't. He just lifted the rifle, pointed it at the dark mass of the creature's back, and pulled the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times. The shots cracked, loud and sharp in the sudden quiet, tearing into the creature's leathery hide. I saw fragments of dark flesh, like burnt paper, peel away. It wasn't much. Not enough. But it was something. The creature roared. Not the wet, guttural sound from before, but a shriek, ear-splitting. A sound that stripped the breath from my lungs and clawed at the inside of my skull. It spun, its massive wings half unfurling, then folding back, a blur of dark motion. Its head snapped towards William. Those yellow eyes, full of triumph a moment before, now blazed with pure, unholy fury. It had been defied. William, spent of bullets, still held the rifle, a useless club. He looked at the creature, his face streaked with tears and dirt, and he didn't flinch. Not this time. There was only grief and the hollow echo of his brother's last moments. He tried to speak, but only a broken sound. A half sob, half gasp escaped his lips. The creature moved. It wasn't a lunge this time, not a clumsy tackle. It was a swift, almost graceful strike. One of its folded wings swept out, a terrible, bladed arc of bone and sinew and membrane. It moved too fast for the eye to follow. William didn't even have time to raise his hands. The wing caught him across the left side of his face. The sound was sickening. A wet, tearing thud. William spun a broken puppet and collapsed. His head hit the earth with a dull crack. He lay there, unmoving. I saw the damage instantly, a deep, ragged gash starting from his temple, tearing across his cheekbone, pulling the skin back, exposing bone. His left eye was a ruined mess, already swelling shut, blood pouring freely into the dirt. He was alive, I thought, but barely. His body twitched, a faint tremor but no sound. 2 dead, 2 dying. I was the last. The creature, its fury not yet sated, turned its attention to me. Its head was cocked, a predatory tilt. Its yellow eyes narrowed, calculating. It knew. It knew I was the last one standing, the last one capable of fighting back. It took a step towards me, then another. Its talons gouged deep into the blood-soaked earth. It was closing in. My rifle was empty, my Colt too. I had nothing left but the raw, desperate will to survive. I looked around, my eyes scanning the scene, searching for anything, any edge. The campfire. It was still burning, though low, a heap of embers and a few stubborn licking flames. Smoke curled lazily into the cold night air. A thought, desperate and half-formed, sparked in my mind. Fire, always fire. I lunged, not at the creature, but for the campfire. It was a gamble. A fool's errand, perhaps, but what else was there? The creature hesitated, momentarily confused by my sudden, erratic movement. It expected me to run, to cower. It didn't expect defiance. I plunged my hand into the embers, ignoring the searing pain, grasping for a burning branch. My fingers closed around a thick piece of mesquite, glowing red-hot at one end. The heat was immense, blistering. I pulled it free, a small torch in my hand, the flames flickering weakly but fiercely. The smell of burning wood, of my own singed flesh, filled my nostrils. The creature roared again, a sound of pure disgust, as if the fire itself offended it. It hated the light, it hated the heat, it hated the defiance. It lunged, its massive body moving with terrifying speed, its talons reaching for me. I met it. Not with a shot, but with a thrust. A desperate, primal lunge. I aimed for its face, for those terrible, intelligent yellow eyes. The burning branch hit. Not a glancing blow, not a scratch. It plunged deep into the creature's face, into the soft tissue around its left eye. The wood hissed, sizzling against its flesh. A terrible, acrid smell of burning hair and cooking meat filled the air. The creature screamed. This was different from any sound it had made before. This was a shriek of pure, unadulterated agony, a sound that was ancient, inhuman, and yet, in its raw pain, horribly familiar. It recoiled violently, tearing the burning branch from my hand, sending it spinning into the darkness. Its head thrashed, its body convulsed. It clawed at its face, at the burning wound, a thick black liquid oozing from the point of impact. For a fleeting, horrifying moment, as its head writhed, I saw its eyes again, both of them, the Nikokatsi, uninjured one. Wide now with pain and shock, still yellow, still slitted, but unmistakably human in its shape, in its expression of torment. And the other, the one I had struck, already darkening, already beginning to melt, a ruin of slitted flesh. There was a malice there, yes, a burning hatred, but also a profound, sickening intelligence, a mind, a human mind trapped in that monstrous form. It didn't shriek again. Instead, it let out a series of guttural, choking sounds, like a man drowning or a beast trying to speak through a broken throat. Its immense body trembled. It staggered back, one step, then two, its talons tearing up the earth. It turned its head, looking at William, then at Cord, then at Dutch's still form. A long, drawn-out sound, like a sigh or a curse, escaped its ruined mouth. Then, with a sudden, violent burst of motion, it launched itself into the air. Its wings unfurled fully, a vast, leathery expanse blotting out the stars for a moment. It beat them once, twice, with incredible power, kicking up a storm of dust and loose earth. It rose higher and higher, a dark, ragged silhouette against the impossibly distant sky. It didn't circle, it didn't hover, it just flew, straight and fast, towards the dark line of the Little Belt Mountains, disappearing into the vast, indifferent night. Silence descended again. A different kind of silence this time. Not the heavy, knowing silence of a predator, but the stunned, ringing silence of aftermath. The only sounds were the ragged gasps of Cord, the faint, shallow breathing of William, and the distant, restless lowing of the herd slowly settling. The air was thick with the smell of blood, fear, and now the sickening tang of burnt flesh. I stood there, my hand still throbbing from the heat of the branch, my mind a blank, hollow space. It was gone. It was truly gone. We had survived, but what had we survived for? I dropped to my knees, shaking, the strength draining from my legs. My gaze swept over the scene. Dutch, lying still, his throat a gaping maw. Reed, somewhere out there, broken against the rocks. Cord, gasping, his chest a bloody ruin. William, his face a mask of torn flesh and dark blood, barely breathing. 4 men. Now 2, maybe 3. If William and Cord held on, the cold was settling in deeper now, not just the night air, but a coldness in my very bones, a coldness that would never leave. We couldn't stay, not here, not another moment. The creature was gone, but the land itself felt tainted, violated. It was its domain now, truly. I crawled to William first. His breathing was shallow, hitched. I tore a strip from my shirt, wetted it with what little water remained in my canteen, and tried to clean the wound. It was worse than I thought. The bone was exposed clean to the jaw. His eye was gone, or close to it. He stirred faintly, a soft moan escaping his mangled lips. He tried to speak, a gargling sound, nothing coherent. Then to Cord, his eyes were open, staring at the sky. He was shivering violently. The cuts on his chest were deep, bleeding sluggishly. I pressed my hand against them, trying to staunch the flow, but my hand was shaking too much. "Jacob," he whispered, his voice a raw rasp. "Jacob." It was... He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. We all knew what it was, what it had been. "We have to move, Samuel," I said, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. "We have to get out of here." Getting out. That was the only thought, the only command. The sun was still hours from rising, but a faint, almost imperceptible gray began to creep into the eastern sky, a false dawn mocking our escape. We had to move before it returned, before it decided to finish us off, or before it simply watched us savoring our brokenness. It was an agonizing process. William couldn't walk. Cord could barely stand. I was the only one fully on my feet, but my body felt like a sack of lead, my mind screaming with exhaustion, and the lingering images of the horror. I found a saddle blanket, laid it on the ground. We managed to roll Cord onto it, groaning with every movement. Then William. He was lighter, but just as broken. "Hold on, William," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "Hold on, boy." I fashioned a makeshift travois from some spare poles and ropes, lashing the blanket to it. It was crude, slow, but it was all I had. I put the ropes over my shoulders, the weight of both men, of their injuries, of their despair, digging into my flesh. I looked at the camp one last time, the dying embers of the fire, the scattered equipment, the dark, unmoving forms of Dutch and Reed. We couldn't bury them. Not now. We had to go. Leave them to the land, to the thing that owned it. We started walking, east, away from the mountains, away from the basin, away from the slaughter. The trek was an endless nightmare. Every step was a battle. The ground was uneven, treacherous in the pre-dawn gloom. The cold seeped into our bones. Cord would moan, his breath catching in his throat. William would whimper, a small, broken sound. I just pushed, one foot in front of the other. The ropes bit into my shoulders. My muscles screamed in protest, but I kept going. I imagined it watching us from the peaks of the little belts, from the shadows of the ravines, its yellow eyes still burning with that ancient malice, following our slow, painful retreat, savoring the sight of our brokenness, our defeat. It had left us alive, yes, but it had taken everything else, our men, our peace, our very understanding of the world. The sun finally broke the horizon, painting the vast plains in hues of orange and purple. It was a beautiful sight usually, but this morning it felt like a cruel joke. Light didn't banish the darkness we carried. It only illuminated the blood on William's face, the ragged tears on Cord's chest, the emptiness in my own heart. We walked on, a procession of ghosts leaving of the cursed basin behind. But the basin and the thing that lived within it wouldn't leave us. It was in the wind that whispered past our ears, in the vast, indifferent sky, in the very earth beneath our feet. We knew it. We just knew. We walked on, a procession of ghosts leaving the cursed basin behind, but the basin and the thing that lived within it wouldn't leave us. It was in the wind that whispered past our ears, in the vast, indifferent sky, in the very earth beneath our feet. We knew it. We just knew. The sun climbed higher, relentless. My shoulders burned, my legs ached. Every breath was a rasp, but I kept pushing, dragging the travois, the weight of the injured, the dead, the impossible horror pressing down on me. I didn't know how far we'd come, only that it wasn't far enough. The prairie seemed to stretch forever, mocking our desperation. Eventually, late in the afternoon, we stumbled upon a small hunting party from Fort Shaw. 3 men tracking buffalo. They saw us from a distance, a strange broken sight on the horizon. They rode hard, their faces grim as they took in the carnage. William, unconscious, his face a ruin. Cord, barely clinging to life, mumbling incoherently. My own face, I imagined, was just as bad, despite the lack of physical wounds. They didn't ask many questions, not at first. They simply helped. Cut us loose from the travois, gave us water, a little jerky. Their eyes, though, held a quiet, horrified understanding as they looked at William and Cord. They saw the blood, they saw the fear. They didn't see the creature, but they saw what it had done. We told them about the attack, about the cattle, about the men we'd lost. I kept the creature vague, a bear, a mountain lion, something monstrous. They nodded, their faces tight. They were frontier men. They knew the wilderness could be cruel, but even they looked at each other with a kind of baffled dread when I described the sheer scale of the devastation. They didn't press. They just helped us back towards Fort Shaw, a slow, painful journey. Another day and a night. We sent a small party back to the Judith Basin with 2 of the soldiers. They found the camp, found Dutch, found Reed, broken against the rocks. They buried them there, in unmarked graves, under the indifferent Montana sky. No coffins, no ceremony, just earth over earth, a hasty, silent farewell. It was what the land offered, and what the land allowed. The official report from the Fort Shaw marshal, when he finally rode out to the basin, was a mess of contradictions. He was a practical man, used to cattle rustlers and Indian raids. He walked the ground where we'd fought. He saw the massive 3-toed tracks pressed deep into the blood-soaked earth. He saw the claw marks gouged into the rock where Reed had been thrown. He found shreds of leathery membrane unlike anything he'd ever seen, caught on a gnarled branch. He poked at the charred ground where I'd fought the thing with fire. He measured. He sketched. He swore under his breath. But he had no explanation. None that would fit into his world. He called it a peculiar animal attack. His eyes, though, told a different story. They were wide, haunted. He left the basin with more questions than answers, and a cold dread he'd never shake. Samuel Cord survived, barely. The doctor at Fort Shaw worked for hours, sewing him up, pulling slivers of bone and muscle from his chest. He lived, but he never worked cattle again. The deep, ragged scars across his chest were a roadmap of the creature's fury, an angry purple testament. He tried to pick up a rope to climb on a horse, but his hands trembled. His spirit was broken. His once dependable strength was replaced by a quiet, haunted tremor that stayed with him until the day he died, a decade later, sitting silent by a window, staring at the empty plains. William Carver, too, survived, but the creature's wing had taken more than flesh. It had taken his sight. or most of it. His left eye was a clouded mess, forever half blind. The split in his cheek healed, a jagged, ugly scar, but it pulled at his mouth, giving him a permanent, lopsided grimace. The worst, though, was his voice. He tried to speak, but the words would catch, stumble, twist into a debilitating stutter. He'd try to explain, to describe, to recount, but the words would pile up. He trapped in his throat, a constant physical reminder of the creature that had whispered to his brother. He tried to go back east to his family, but he was a different man, broken. He spent his days in quiet, agonizing solitude, a living testament to the terror's lasting grip. His mind, once sharp, frayed at the edges. He saw shapes in the shadows, heard whispers in the wind. The Nik'soka'katsi had marked him, inside and out. And me? Jacob Hollister. I walked away physically whole. No scars, no missing parts. But the creature had carved something out of me all the same. The silence that knew. Our names? It knew mine too? I tried to forget. Tried to drink it away. The whiskey became my shadow, always there, always waiting. I saw their faces in the bottom of every glass. Reed's young, eager face, Dutch's booming laugh, Cord's steady eyes, William's broken stare, and the creature's yellow, slitted eyes burning with human malice, always there, just beyond the edge of my vision. I rode away from Fort Shaw, away from the basin, but I never truly left it. I was found 5 years later, at the bottom of a ravine, my neck broken. The official report said I fell, drunk. Maybe I did, or maybe, just maybe, the thing had finally come for me, to finish what it started. The marshal, for all his bafflement, was a wise man in his own way. He knew there were some things beyond a rifle and a rope. He knew there was a reason the Blackfeet didn't hunt in that part of the basin. He sought out 2 eagles, an elder known for his deep knowledge of the old ways, his understanding of the land's hidden truths. 2 eagles refused to approach the site. He wouldn't even come within 100 yards of it. He stood on a rise, his back to the ravaged ground, his face a landscape of ancient wisdom and sorrow. "That place," 2 eagles said, his voice soft but resonant, "it is not empty, it is not quiet, it is claimed." The marshal pressed him. "What claimed it, old man? What kind of animal could do such a thing?" 2 eagles looked out at the vast, indifferent prairie, not at the marshal. "Not an animal, not a beast of the forest or plain. It is Nik'soka'katsi, the winged damned, a man once, cursed for cannibalism, for murder of his kin, for desecration of the dead. The spirits cast him out, gave him wings, gave him talons, but left him with a man's mind, a man's malice, and a hunger that never dies." He spoke of its intelligence, its vengeance, its territorial claim. "It will return," he warned, his eyes holding the marshal's. "It will kill anyone who returns. It draws strength from fear, from blood. It has made its claim. That land is its hunting ground now, forever." The marshal didn't know what to believe, but he knew what he saw. The evidence, the terror in my eyes, the brokenness of Cord and William. He rode back to Fort Shaw. The ranchers, when they heard 2 eagles' words, didn't need convincing. Not after what we'd endured, not after what was left of us. They abandoned the Judith Basin entirely, left the cattle to roam, left the cabins to rot, left the land to the thing that owned it. The legend grew. Whispers carried on the wind from one campfire to the next. The winged devil of Judith Basin. For decades, the stories persisted. Reports of strange lights in the night sky, far too high for any lantern. The sound of massive wings beating the air. A sound like wet leather sails heard miles away. Torn cattle, found dismembered in ways no wolf could manage. And the worst, the most chilling of all, broken human voices calling out in the darkness, echoes of terror, whispers of "mine now, my turn." No verified witness ever saw the creature again, not up close, but the dread remained. Some said there was only one. Others that there were many, a whole cursed tribe. I don't know. I only know what I saw, what I survived, what hollowed me out and left me a ghost in my own skin. The Judith Basin, that wide, indifferent land, holds its secrets still, and somewhere out there, among the peaks of the Little Belt Mountains, or perhaps deeper in the shadows of the ravines, the Nik'soka'katsi waits, immortal, patient. An ancient evil, a permanent fixture in the wild places, ever ready to remind humanity of its fragile place in a world older and more terrible than they can imagine. And it waits. It always waits.